Professor Amoako, we've seen African manufacturing in particular decline over the last couple of decades. What has been some of the contributing factors to that?
Some of the contributing factors include the ignoring the underlying infrastructure that make our companies competitive. So we've lost our manufacturing base because now we have a lot of imports into our countries that are cheaper and perceived to be of higher quality than what we are capable of producing. And so until we can, if you take some African countries, for example, what you need to do a good job of manufacturing, there's obviously the human capital portion of that. But another huge component is things like electricity or energy to allow companies to produce on a continuous basis. And not having adequate energy supplies, for example, in Ghana, means that the cost of manufacturing is gone up so much that you are uncompetitive. And so you have countries that are importing second-hand clothing, whereas their, textile industries lie dormant, for example. And so, so briefly, you have cost, we are not cost competitive, and quality, our products are perceived not to be of higher quality. And I use the word perception as opposed to reality.
Why is it that the Asian economies have been able to latch on to this demand for manufacturing?
A lot of companies go to, for example, from the United States, go to China because of cheap labor. And China's population is about 1.3 billion people. Africa as a whole has almost 1 billion people. So if Africa were to organize properly, we could compete with the Chinese in terms of the labor content of what is being produced over there. However, we have so many barriers, we have so many structures, we have so many underlying institutions that make it difficult for us to take advantage of the, the labor population in Africa. And so countries are going to, Bangladesh because the labor there is cheap, but they could also find out cheap labor in Africa if we were properly organized.
As incomes are rising, especially in East Asia, manufacturing will move and will seek other places. How do we ensure that we can prepare Africa for this coming shift in manufacturing patterns?
If we position ourselves very well, Africa could be the next manufacturing giant. And to do that, once again, we have to go back and say, what drives our quality? What drives our cost? So we need to put into place mechanisms that will allow us to, again, to become cost competitive. And so, we need to find ways to increase our productivity. In general, the productivity of labor is very, very low. Okay, we need to develop mechanisms in place that ensure sustainability of whatever we do. Sometimes in some countries, the maintenance culture is very poor. So you have machines that are installed, nobody maintains them. In a very few years, you see the machines broken down, and the production is not sustainable. So it's up to the governments in Africa to really think about the educational system, the training system, the underlying infrastructure that we have in our countries that will ensure that we rise up to the challenge. Because again, I agree with you, the cost, as China moves into middle income status, labor is going to become very costly. Actually, we've seen that in the US, some of the companies that move to China are moving back to the US. Because you take out that cost factor, as it goes up, then China is no longer competitive. But as other countries become affluent, Singapore, other places like that, Brazil, they're going to look for, again, cheaper sources of labor. And that's where Africa can really position itself to play a very good role.
Much of Africa's economies are based on extractive industries of raw materials, which are all exported, unbeneficiated. Which sectors should African countries focus on in terms of manufacturing?
Obviously, the mining industries, because we have the advantage of the raw materials being here. The other one is energy, and think about ways in which the vast amounts of oil on the continent or off the shelves of the continent, for example, can be exploited. Not just shipping, but what are the allied industries associated with those extractive industries that we can capitalize on. That's one thing. And then the next thing is food, actually. Because we have a vast land, we have many rivers, we have land that can be utilized for food processing. food, first feeding the continent, obviously. Africa spends over $350 billion a year in food imports. And it doesn't make sense when we have so much land and we have so much labor, and we do have the know-how. We just have to organize ourselves to really take advantage of that.
How do we bridge that gap between owning the intellectual, the IP, and the manufacturing thereof?
Well, there are some things that we can do that we don't need necessarily to reinvent the wheel. And I would say, by and large, Africans are law-abiding. And so if we are using technology for which we did not develop the intellectual property, I think we are law-abiding to the sense that we can put into place the legal framework to allow us to utilize the technology. At the same time, what's not been capitalized on is the ingenuity of the African and our ability to come up with solutions. And so one way also to do that is to look at ways in which we can utilize our innovative talent within our societies and capitalize on that in terms of develop unique technologies that are suited, to the continent, that will help us address our energy problems, our food problems, and our storage problems also.